Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now, close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. Sophie had always considered childhood friendships to be a precious thing. They were built on shared secrets, endless summers, and the belief that nothing would ever change. But as she grew older, she realized that time had a way of reshaping people, sometimes in ways that were impossible to predict. And no friendship had taught her this more painfully than the one she once shared with Cashin. Cashin and Sophie had been inseparable as kids. Growing up in the same small town, they had spent countless afternoons riding bikes through the winding neighborhood streets, inventing games in the nearby woods, and promising to always be there for one another. But childhood pacts, Sophie had learned, did not always survive adulthood. It wasn't one specific moment that had driven them apart. No dramatic betrayal, no single defining argument. Instead, life had simply happened. Sophie went off to college in another city, eager to build a future for herself, while Cashin stayed behind, unwilling or perhaps unable to leave the familiarity of their hometown. They kept in touch at first, occasional texts, holiday greetings, but the distance between them grew wider, the conversations less frequent. Eventually, Sophie stopped replying, not out of malice, but because she had moved on. But Cashin had not. It started subtly, an unexpected message from him on her birthday. Nothing unusual, just a simple, "Hope you have an amazing day, Soph. Miss you." It had been years since they had last spoken, and seeing his name flash on her phone had made her pause. She had smiled, nostalgic for a moment, before setting her phone down and deciding not to reply. A week later, another message arrived. "Hey, I saw a picture of you and your friends at that cafe in town. You still love their caramel lattes, huh? We should catch up." That was when she felt the first twinge of unease. She hadn't posted that photo herself. It had been one of her friends. Had he been looking through their profiles? She brushed the thought aside, convincing herself it was nothing. He was just being friendly, just reminiscing. But something about it made her stomach tighten. The messages continued. Some were innocent enough, memories from their childhood, inside jokes they had shared years ago. Others felt off. "I was thinking about you today. Do you ever think about me? About us? Saw your new profile picture. You look beautiful, but I think I liked your hair better the way it was before. It's funny, I walked by your old house today and thought about all the times we used to sit on your porch. It still feels like you should be there." She hadn't responded to any of them. Then came the first call. Sophie had been out late with friends, her phone on silent. When she checked it the next morning, she saw a missed call from an unknown number. A voicemail. "Hey, Soph, it's me. I just wanted to hear your voice. I don't know, I guess I just missed talking to you. I hope you're okay. Call me back when you get this. Please." She deleted it without replying. That was a mistake, because the next call came the following night. Then another. Then another. The unknown number kept appearing on her screen, always late at night, always going to voicemail. And the messages began to change. "Why won't you answer? I know you see my messages. It's not fair to just ignore me like this. We were best friends. We still are. I don't understand what I did wrong. Just talk to me. Please. You can't just erase me, Sophie. I won't let you." She blocked the number. But blocking didn't stop him. It only made things worse. A few days later, Sophie was leaving work when she spotted something that sent ice through her veins. Across the street, standing just far enough away that it wasn't an obvious confrontation, was Cashin. Watching, her breath hitched. It had been years since she had seen him in person, but there was no mistaking him. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, staring in her direction. For a second, she convinced herself that she was imagining things. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him. But then he moved. He tilted his head slightly, as if waiting for her to acknowledge him. Sophie turned and walked in the opposite direction, her heart pounding in her ears. That night, a new message appeared on her phone, from a number she didn't recognize. "You looked really pretty today. I almost said hi, but you seemed busy." Her fingers trembled as she typed out a response for the first time since this had started. Cashin, stop. This isn't funny. You need to leave me alone. The reply came almost instantly. Funny? No, Sophie. What's funny is how you think you can just forget me. I've been here the whole time. And you'll see we're not done yet. Sophie's stomach dropped. Because for the first time since this had started, she truly understood. Cashin wasn't just reaching out to reconnect. He had never let go of her. And now he never planned to. Sophie spent the next few days feeling as though she was constantly being watched. The message from Cashin lingered in her mind, poisoning every moment of solitude. She hadn't told anyone yet, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding paranoid. What if she was overreacting? What if this was just some misguided attempt at reconnecting? But deep down, she knew better. The next evening, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. The urge to delete the messages gnawed at her, but something told her to keep them. Evidence, she thought. Just in case. She hovered her thumb over the block button again. Would it make a difference? Blocking him hadn't stopped the calls before. Instead, he had just found another way. Then came the knock on her door. Her heart lurched into her throat. It was late, too late for a casual visitor. Her friends would have texted if they were dropping by. Slowly, she stood, pulse hammering, and peered through the peephole. No one was there. A chill ran down her spine. Sophie hesitated before unlocking the door, cracking it open just enough to see the empty hallway. A small white envelope lay on the welcome mat. She glanced up and down the corridor, her breath shallow, but the space remained eerily silent. She snatched the envelope and shut the door quickly, locking it behind her. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper neatly folded. I just want to talk. Her vision blurred as panic set in. He had been here, outside her door, watching, waiting. She dropped the letter as though it had burned her and backed away from it. This was no longer just messages, no longer something she could brush off. The next morning, Sophie called her best friend, Ava. She kept her voice calm, factual. I think someone's following me. Ava was at her apartment within the hour, pacing the living room as Sophie recounted everything, starting from the first messages up until the letter at her doorstep. And you didn't call the police? Ava asked, arms crossed. Sophie, this isn't normal. Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't have proof that he did anything illegal. What am I supposed to say? Hi, officer, my childhood friend won't stop texting me. Ava gave her a pointed look. You tell them he's been harassing you, standing outside your work, leaving notes at your door. This is stalking. Sophie exhaled sharply. I know. I don't want to make it worse. Ava's expression softened. You don't have to deal with this alone. Let's at least document everything. If you don't want to call the police yet, fine. But don't ignore this. Reluctantly, Sophie agreed. She and Ava sat down, compiling everything. Screenshots of messages, call logs, a photo of the note. It was a terrifying process, seeing it all laid out in one place. It wasn't just a bad feeling in her gut anymore. It was real. That night, Sophie double-checked that her doors and windows were locked. She pulled the curtains closed, every instinct telling her to shut out the world. She told herself she was safe, that she had control. Then, in the dead silence of the night, her phone buzzed again. A new message. Why are you shutting me out? We're supposed to be in this together. Her stomach twisted. He knew. He knew she was afraid. He was enjoying it, and she had no idea how to make it stop. Sophie barely slept that night. Every creak of her apartment, every gust of wind against the windows sent her heart racing. She knew logically that she had locked every door and checked every window, but logic had little power over fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Cashin standing outside, waiting, watching. By morning, she had made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending this was going to go away on its own. Ava had been right. She needed to do something. She arrived at the police station just after 9, gripping a folder containing every piece of evidence she had collected. Screenshots, call logs, photos of the letter. The officer at the front desk gave her a sympathetic nod as he directed her to a detective, a woman named Detective Harris. Detective Harris took her time reviewing the documents, her sharp eyes scanning over every message. When she finally looked up, her face was unreadable. You've done the right thing coming here, she said. This behavior is escalating. We can file a formal report and put in a request for a restraining order. And if that doesn't stop him? Sophie asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Detective Harris folded her hands on the desk. If he violates the order, we can take legal action. But even before that, I'd advise you to change your routine. Don't take the same route home every day, don't go anywhere alone at night, and keep your phone on you at all times. Do you know if he has a history of this kind of behavior? Sophie hesitated. Not that I know of, but we haven't really spoken in years. Harris nodded. That's common in these cases. People fixate on a past version of someone, and when reality doesn't match their expectations, they don't handle it well. Sophie exhaled slowly. So what do I do now? We'll file the report. If he contacts you again, document everything and call us immediately. And if you ever feel like you're in immediate danger, don't hesitate, call 911. Sophie nodded, gripping the folder tightly. This was the first step. She just had to hope it was enough. That evening, she tried to distract herself with work, but her focus was shattered. Every notification on her phone sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. But as the hours passed and no new messages arrived, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, Cashin had finally gotten the message. She went to bed exhausted, but for the first time in days she managed to sleep. Until the knocking woke her up. It was soft, deliberate. 3 slow taps against her door. Sophie bolted upright, her pulse hammering in her ears. She grabbed her phone and checked the time, 2:47 a.m. The knocking came again. She forced herself to move, creeping toward the peephole with bated breath. When she looked, her stomach turned to ice. There was no one there. Her hands trembled as she backed away from the door. She checked her phone, no missed calls, no messages. But she knew. Cashin was there, and he wanted her to know it. Sophie barely slept after the knocking incident. Every nerve in her body was on high alert, and even though she never saw anyone through the peephole, she knew it was him. She had double-checked the locks, wedged a chair under the doorknob, and even considered calling the police. But what would she say? That someone knocked on her door? The morning felt like an escape. The sunlight streaming through her window made her feel foolish for the fear that had gripped her in the darkness. But as she stepped outside, her stomach dropped. Tucked under the windshield wiper of her car was another note, written in the same careful handwriting as the one left at her doorstep. I just wanted to see you. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she yanked the note away, scanning the parking lot for any sign of Cashin. It was empty, but that didn't mean he hadn't been there just moments before. Heart pounding, she called Ava. I need to get out of here, she said, voice shaking. Sophie, what happened? Ava's concern was immediate. Another note. On my car. I don't even know when he left it. Okay, you're coming to my place. Pack a bag and stay here for a while. You shouldn't be alone. Sophie hesitated, glancing back at her apartment. It was her home, her space. But it didn't feel safe anymore. Okay, she whispered. I'll be there soon. Ava's apartment was a welcome refuge. It was bright, warm, and most importantly, secure. Sophie exhaled as she locked the door behind her, finally feeling like she could breathe. Ava hugged her tightly before pulling her to the couch. Tell me everything. Sophie relayed every detail. The messages, the calls, the note on her door, the knocking at 2 a.m., and now, the latest message left on her car. Ava's expression darkened with every word. You need to go back to the police, Ava said firmly. This is stalking, Sophie. He's not just texting you anymore. He's coming to your home. He's watching you. I already filed a report. What else can they do? Ava grabbed her phone. I don't know, but we're going to find out. That evening, they returned to the police station. Sophie showed them the latest note, explained how she had left her apartment that morning without seeing anyone, and that Cashin had managed to slip the message onto her car unseen. Detective Harris was waiting for her. You were right to come back, she said. We'll issue a formal warning to him and expedite the restraining order. But Sophie, if he escalates further, don't wait. Call us immediately. The words sent a fresh chill down Sophie's spine. You think he's going to escalate? Harris's face was serious. Men like him don't just stop. That night, back at Ava's apartment, Sophie tried to sleep, but unease kept her awake. The rational part of her told her that she was safe here. But fear wasn't rational. Her phone buzzed at 3 a.m. A new message from an unknown number. You think you can run? Sophie's blood turned to ice. Cashin knew she wasn't home, and that meant he had been there. Again. Sophie sat frozen, staring at the message on her phone. "You think you can run?" The words sent a chill through her veins, a stark reminder that Cashin wasn't just watching. He was following. He knew she wasn't at her apartment, which meant he had been there looking for her. Ava stirred beside her on the couch, awakened by Sophie's sharp intake of breath. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily, rubbing her eyes. Wordlessly, Sophie handed her the phone. Ava's face darkened as she read the message. "That's it. We're going back to the police. Right now." Sophie shook her head, her hands trembling. What if that just makes him angrier? What if it escalates things? Ava grabbed Sophie's shoulders, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Sophie, he's already escalating. He's going to keep pushing until something happens. We have to do something before it gets worse." Sophie swallowed hard, nodding. She knew Ava was right. The police station was quieter at this hour, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the waiting area. Detective Harris was still on duty and met them with a serious expression. Sophie placed her phone on the desk. "He knows I'm not home. He sent this message tonight." Harris picked up the phone, her face unreadable. "He's tracking you. He might not have a GPS on you, but he's watching your movements. He's either seeing you leave your apartment, or he's checking social media to figure out where you are." Ava stiffened. She barely posts anything. Harris exhaled. "Then he's watching her." A shiver ran down Sophie's spine. "What do I do?" "We're going to put a trace on his number, if possible. We'll issue an official restraining order. But Sophie, you need to stay somewhere safe. Don't go home alone. And if you see him anywhere, call us immediately." Sophie nodded, gripping the edge of the desk. "And what if he doesn't listen?" Harris's eyes darkened. "Then we make sure he does." Back at Ava's apartment, Sophie curled up in a blanket, exhaustion creeping over her. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. Every noise outside made her flinch. Ava sat next to her. "We'll get through this. You're not alone." Sophie nodded, but the anxiety still clawed at her. She knew Cashin. He wasn't the type to just walk away. Her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart hammering. But it wasn't from Cashin. It was a restricted number. She pressed her lips together and answered, her voice shaking. "Hello." Silence. Then a soft, familiar voice. "Sophie, I don't understand why you're doing this to me." Her breath caught in her throat. "Cashin, you're making me the bad guy. I just want to talk to you. I just want us to be how we used to be. Don't you miss me?" Sophie's grip on the phone tightened. "You need to stop. Now." "I can't stop, Sophie. I won't. You don't get to just leave me behind." Her stomach twisted. "This isn't normal. You need help." Cashin let out a sharp laugh. "You think I'm crazy? After everything we've been through? You don't get to cut me out. You owe me." Sophie's blood ran cold. "I don't owe you anything." The line went dead. Ava's hand was on her shoulder in an instant. "What did he say?" Sophie could barely speak. "He's not going to stop." For the first time since this started, Sophie felt the true weight of it. Cashin wasn't just obsessed. He was convinced she belonged to him. Sophie barely slept after the call. Every time she closed her eyes, Cashin's voice echoed in her mind. "You owe me." The words felt like a trap, a claim on her life that she had never agreed to. By morning, Ava had already made coffee and was scrolling through her phone, searching for ways to strengthen security at the apartment. "We need to get cameras," she said firmly. "If he comes near the building again, we need proof." Sophie nodded, exhaustion pressing against her skull. "And what if he doesn't stop? What if the restraining order doesn't work?" Ava sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Then we make sure the police take this seriously. You don't deserve to live like this." The day passed in a blur. Sophie called her job and explained that she needed a few days off, vaguely citing personal reasons. She didn't want to tell them the truth. She wasn't ready to have this become gossip among her coworkers. By the evening, Ava had set up a small security camera outside her apartment door, one that connected to Sophie's phone. "If he so much as breathes near your place, we'll know." Sophie exhaled deeply. "Thank you." Ava gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You're not alone in this." That night, Sophie forced herself to go to bed early, phone in hand, but sleep felt impossible. Every sound outside made her jolt awake. The faint hum of traffic, the occasional footstep in the hallway, all of it felt sinister now. She glanced at the security app on her phone, checking the camera feed. Nothing. Then, just past 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Why are you doing this to me? I just want to talk." Her stomach clenched. She turned off her phone and rolled onto her side, willing herself to ignore it. But the knocking started 5 minutes later. Soft, insistent, just like before. Sophie sat up, her pulse hammering. She grabbed her phone and checked the security camera feed. Cashin stood outside the door. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just standing there, head tilted slightly, as if waiting for her to answer. Sophie's breath came in short gasps. She scrambled to shake Ava awake. "Ava, he's here." Ava was up in an instant, grabbing Sophie's phone. "Oh my God!" Cashin knocked again, and then, after a long pause, he pressed something against the door. A folded note. Then he turned and walked away. Sophie and Ava sat frozen, watching as he disappeared down the hallway. Ava exhaled sharply. "We're calling the police. Right now." Sophie nodded, feeling tears sting at her eyes. She was done feeling helpless. She wouldn't let him take her life away from her. The police arrived within 20 minutes, their presence making Sophie feel both relieved and uneasy. 2 uniformed officers took her statement while Ava sat beside her, arms crossed tightly, her face a mask of frustration. One officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, examined the note Cashin had left behind. He opened it carefully, revealing neat handwriting that made Sophie's skin crawl. "I don't understand why you're pushing me away. You don't have to be afraid of me. We belong in each other's lives, Sophie. You know that." The officer exhaled through his nose. "This is escalating. He's not just texting anymore. He's showing up, leaving physical evidence. Have you considered filing for a more urgent protective order?" Sophie swallowed hard. "I already filed one, but I don't know if he's been served yet." "We'll expedite that process," the officer assured her. "And we'll see if we can get a patrol car to keep an eye on your building. In the meantime, don't go anywhere alone and keep every piece of evidence. If he contacts you again, call us immediately." Sophie nodded numbly. The officers left, promising to check in soon. When the door closed behind them, Ava turned to her. "That's it. You're staying with me until this is over." Sophie didn't argue. She packed a bag that night, stuffing it with essentials, while Ava set up additional security measures in her apartment. Extra locks, a door wedge, even a makeshift alarm using a stack of metal pans near the entrance. But even with all the precautions, Sophie knew she wouldn't feel safe. Not until Cashin was completely out of her life. Days passed without incident, and for a moment, Sophie allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Cashin had given up. But then the calls started again. Restricted numbers. No voicemails. Just endless ringing in the dead of night. She didn't answer. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Then, a message came through from an unknown number. "Ignoring me won't make me go away, Sophie. I know where you are." Her stomach twisted. She turned to Ava, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. "He knows I'm here." Ava's face went pale. "That's it. We're going to the police again. Right now." Sophie grabbed her coat, her heart pounding, and followed Ava out the door. This time, she wasn't just scared. She was furious. Cashin had taken too much from her already, and she was done letting him control her life. Sophie and Ava arrived at the police station just past midnight, exhaustion evident in their faces, but urgency fueling their steps. The same officer from last time, Detective Harris, was still on duty, and the moment she saw them, she sighed as if she had been expecting this. "Another message?" Harris asked, motioning for them to sit down. Sophie slid her phone across the desk, the latest message from Cashin still glowing on the screen. "Ignoring me won't make me go away, Sophie. I know where you are." Harris studied the screen before looking up, her expression grim. "He's escalating. Stalkers don't stop on their own. If he knows where you are now, it means he's watching, or he's got someone feeding him information." Ava stiffened. "So what do we do?" He's been outside her apartment, left messages, sent texts from different numbers. "Isn't that enough to arrest him?" Harris exhaled. "We're building a case. But right now, he hasn't physically harmed you or made a direct, provable threat. The system works in steps. But what I can do is speed up the restraining order process and get a judge to sign off on it immediately. That way, if he contacts you again, we can make an arrest." Sophie's fingers curled into fists. "And what if that doesn't stop him? Then we go after him with everything we've got." By the time they returned to Ava's apartment, the exhaustion in Sophie's body had turned to something heavier, dread. She sat on the couch, staring at her phone, waiting for the inevitable. Another message. Another call. Another sign that Cashin was still out there, still watching. Ava placed a cup of tea in front of her. "You should get some sleep." Sophie gave a hollow laugh. "I don't even remember what that feels like." Ava sat beside her, voice soft. "You're not alone in this. We're going to stop him." Sophie nodded, but deep inside, she wasn't sure she believed it. The next morning, Sophie woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and for a brief second felt normal. Then her phone buzzed. She reached for it, stomach sinking the moment she saw the unknown number. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Sophie. We could have fixed this. But now you've forced my hand." Her breath caught in her throat. This was different. This wasn't Cashin begging or pleading. This was a warning. Ava, reading over her shoulder, muttered, "Okay, that's it. We need a plan." "What kind of plan?" Sophie whispered. Ava's eyes darkened. "One where he doesn't see us coming." That night, with the police now actively monitoring the situation, Sophie and Ava took their own precautions. They left Ava's apartment under the guise of running errands, but instead drove in circles, checking for anyone following them. Ava had Sophie turn off her phone's location services, delete any apps Cashin might be using to track her, and make her social media completely private. It felt like trying to outrun a shadow. When they returned home, Sophie opened her laptop, hesitating before typing Cashin's name into a search engine. What she found made her stomach turn. Multiple social media accounts, all active, all posting cryptic messages about betrayal and second chances. Pictures of places she had been in the past week. A single caption that sent ice through her veins. "You can't hide from fate." Ava clenched her jaw. "He's making it clear he's not done." Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. "Then neither are we." She had spent weeks afraid, running, waiting for the next move. Now she was done being the prey. It was time to fight back. Sophie spent the next few days consumed by a growing sense of determination. She was done running, done feeling like she had no control over her life. Cashin had spent weeks invading her space, making her question her own safety, but that was going to change. With Ava's help, she began taking steps to reclaim her life. They updated all her passwords, removed any lingering connections Cashin might have had to her accounts, and set up cameras outside both Ava's apartment and Sophie's old place. Detective Harris had arranged for increased police patrols near their residence, and Sophie found a sliver of comfort in knowing someone was watching over them. But the relief was short-lived. It started with a new email, one Sophie almost didn't see because it had been filtered into her spam folder. The subject line sent a shiver down her spine. "This isn't over." She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling over the trackpad. The message was short, but it was enough to make her heart race. "You think you're safe? You think they can protect you? They don't care, Sophie. No one will ever care about you the way I do." Ava, reading over her shoulder, exhaled sharply. "That's it. This isn't just some guy who can't take a hint. He's obsessed." Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. What if he's right? What if the police can't stop him? Ava squeezed her hand. "Then we do. We don't let him win." That night, Sophie made another visit to the police station. This time, she sat across from Detective Harris, her voice steady as she presented the latest email. Harris frowned as she read. "He's trying to wear you down, make you feel isolated. He wants you scared." "It's working," Sophie admitted. "But I'm done being scared. What can we do?" Harris nodded approvingly. "We're working on tracing his activity. If he sent this email, he's making digital footprints, and we're going to find him. Meanwhile, don't engage. If he reaches out, document it and report it, but don't reply. That only feeds his delusions." Sophie nodded. She was holding on to every bit of advice Harris gave, but a deep part of her was still afraid. Cashin was always one step ahead. He had found ways around every block, every restriction. And he wasn't stopping. The next day, Ava decided they needed a distraction. "We need to get out of the apartment, just for a little bit. Let's go somewhere public, somewhere safe." Sophie hesitated, but she knew Ava was right. They couldn't stay locked away forever. They chose a busy coffee shop in the city, one that was always packed with people. It felt safer somehow, surrounded by strangers instead of hiding in fear. For the first time in weeks, Sophie allowed herself to relax, sipping her latte and listening to Ava chatter about random topics. But then, halfway through their conversation, she noticed it. A figure outside, standing just beyond the glass window. Watching. Her stomach dropped. Cashin. His eyes met hers, and he didn't move. Didn't try to hide. Just stood there, staring, his expression unreadable. Ava followed her gaze, her face hardening. "We're leaving. Now." Sophie's pulse hammered as they gathered their things. They exited through the side door, quickly weaving through the crowd, hoping to lose him in the sea of people. But as she glanced back over her shoulder, her heart stopped. Cashin was still there, still watching, and smiling. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she and Ava hurried away from the cafe. The city streets bustled around them, but to Sophie, it felt like she and Cashin were the only two people in the world. He was following. She didn't need to turn around to confirm it. She could feel his presence like a shadow at her back. "Keep walking," Ava muttered under her breath, gripping Sophie's wrist tightly. "We're heading straight to the police station." Sophie nodded, her breath shallow. "What if he does something? What if he—" "We're not going to let him get that chance," Ava said firmly. "We're almost there." They crossed a busy intersection, weaving through crowds. Sophie risked a glance back. Cashin was still there, keeping his distance but never losing sight of them. The look in his eyes sent an icy shiver down her spine. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He was enjoying this. A few minutes later, they stepped into the brightly lit police station. And for the first time in weeks, Sophie felt like she could breathe. They approached the front desk, where Detective Harris was just finishing a conversation with another officer. The moment she saw Sophie and Ava's pale, anxious faces, she stood up. "Tell me what happened," Harris said immediately, leading them into a private office. Sophie recounted everything. How Cashin had been watching them at the cafe, how he had followed them through the streets, how he had refused to look away when she met his gaze. "He's not just sending messages anymore," she whispered. "He's showing up." Harris folded her arms, her face hard. "That means he's getting bolder. This isn't just passive harassment anymore. It's physical stalking. We need to act now." Ava leaned forward. "Can you arrest him?" "Not yet," Harris admitted. "But we're close. With the restraining order in place, if he makes another move, we can take him into custody. But I want to be proactive." She turned to Sophie. "You need to leave town for a few days. Somewhere safe, somewhere he won't expect." Sophie hesitated. "Run away." "It's not running," Harris said firmly. "It's buying us time to tighten the case against him." Ava nodded. "My parents have a cabin a few hours from here. No one knows about it. We could go there." Sophie exhaled, the idea of leaving feeling both like an escape and a defeat. But what choice did she have? "Okay," she whispered. "We'll go." That night, Sophie packed a bag, her hands shaking as she stuffed clothes into it. Ava had already made arrangements with her parents, who were more than willing to lend them the cabin. As she zipped up her bag, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Dread pooled in her stomach. Slowly, she reached for it. A new message from an unknown number. "You can run, Sophie, but you can't hide." Her blood ran cold. Ava walked into the room, immediately noticing the look on Sophie's face. "What is it?" Wordlessly, Sophie handed her the phone. Ava read the message and let out a sharp breath. "That's it. We're leaving now." Sophie didn't argue. Within minutes, they were in the car, heading toward the only place where Cashin couldn't find her. Or so she hoped. The road stretched ahead of them, endless and dark. The headlights of Ava's car sliced through the night, illuminating only a few feet ahead before everything was swallowed again by the shadows of the dense forest. The silence between them was heavy, but neither of them had the energy to break it. Sophie's fingers dug into her seatbelt, her stomach twisted with anxiety. "We're safe," Ava murmured as if reading Sophie's thoughts. "He doesn't know where we're going." Sophie nodded, but the nagging doubt in her mind refused to quiet. Cashin had always found a way. He had always been one step ahead. What if he knew more than they thought? What if he was already on their trail? Ava's family cabin was nestled deep in the mountains, accessible only by a winding dirt road that barely fit a single vehicle. It was the perfect hiding place, secluded, unknown to anyone except a handful of Ava's relatives. As they pulled up to the cabin, the trees stood tall and unmoving around them, their skeletal branches stretching out like claws against the night sky. "Home sweet home," Ava said softly, cutting the engine. Let's get inside. The moment Sophie stepped out of the car, she was hit by the sheer silence of the place. No traffic, no voices, just the distant hum of the wind through the trees. It should have been calming, but it only made her nerves worse. It was too quiet, too isolated. Ava unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The cabin smelled like cedar and dust, untouched for months. Ava moved quickly, switching on a few lamps, casting the space in a warm glow. There's food in the kitchen, extra blankets in the closet. We'll be fine here. Sophie nodded, setting her bag down on the couch. Thank you for all of this. Ava gave her a small smile. You don't have to thank me. We're in this together. Sophie tried to relax. She really did. But as the hours passed and the cabin settled into the stillness of the night, her paranoia refused to let her rest. She sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, half expecting to see Cashin's face emerge from the shadows. Her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it in panic, fumbling to grab it from the table. A text from Detective Harris. We've served the restraining order. If he contacts you again, let me know immediately. Sophie exhaled, relief washing over her. This was a step forward, a legal boundary Cashin couldn't cross without consequences. She typed back quickly. Thank you. I'll keep you updated. But just as she placed her phone back down, a new message popped up from an unknown number. You really think that piece of paper will keep me away? Sophie's breath hitched. The room suddenly felt colder. Her hands shook as she read the message again, hoping she had imagined it. Ava noticed immediately. What? What happened? Sophie turned her phone, so Ava could see the message. A flash of anger crossed Ava's face. That's it. We call Harris. Now. Sophie could barely breathe. She clutched her phone, her mind racing. Cashin knew. He always knew. And now, even out here in the middle of nowhere, he had found her again. Sophie's breath came in short, uneven bursts. She stared at the message on her phone, her fingers gripping the device so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Cashin knew where she was. He always knew. Ava was already dialing Detective Harris. No more waiting. No more guessing. He's violating the restraining order. Sophie swallowed hard, her mouth dry. What if he's already here? What if he's outside right now? Ava shook her head, trying to keep her voice calm. The police will handle it. Just stay with me, okay? Detective Harris answered almost immediately. Ava put the call on speaker. He just messaged Sophie. Ava said quickly. He knows where we are. There was a brief pause on the other end. Stay inside, Harris instructed firmly. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except law enforcement. We're tracing the number now and sending a unit your way. Sophie nodded, even though the detective couldn't see her. Okay, do not respond to him, Harris continued. The more you engage, the more power you give him. He wants a reaction. Don't give it to him. Sophie's hands trembled as she set her phone down. Ava moved swiftly, double-checking the locks and shutting the curtains. We're safe in here, she murmured. He can't get in. But Sophie wasn't sure she believed that. The next 20 minutes passed in excruciating silence. Every small noise outside made Sophie flinch. Ava sat beside her, keeping one hand on her knee in silent reassurance. The cabin was surrounded by thick woods, and the only road leading in was narrow and difficult to navigate. It was supposed to make them feel safe. Instead, it made Sophie feel trapped. Ava's phone vibrated, making both of them jump. She quickly picked it up. It's Harris. She answered, and Harris spoke quickly. We traced the number. It's a burner phone, but we're still working on narrowing down its location. Officers are close to your area. If anything happens, call 911 immediately. Got it, Ava said. Please hurry. Harris hesitated. We will. And Sophie, stay strong. This will end. Sophie nodded, though her nerves were fraying. She didn't want to be strong anymore. She just wanted to be free of this. An hour passed. Then another. No more messages came. No knocks on the door. No sign of Cashin. Sophie should have felt relief, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. Then, just past midnight, the power went out. The cabin was plunged into total darkness. Sophie's pulse skyrocketed. No, no, no. Ava grabbed her phone, switching on the flashlight. It's probably just a power failure. Maybe the storm knocked something out. But Sophie wasn't convinced. Her gut told her otherwise. Then outside there was a sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was there. Ava grabbed Sophie's wrist. "Get your phone. Now." Sophie fumbled for it, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. "911, what is your emergency?" Sophie's voice barely worked. "There's someone outside the cabin. We think it's him." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher instructed. "Units are already en route. Do not engage with the person outside. Lock all doors and remain where you are." Sophie clutched the phone like a lifeline. Ava held a fire poker in her other hand, standing protectively in front of her. Then from outside, a voice. Low. Familiar. "Sophie. Cashin." Her blood turned to ice. "I know you're in there," he called softly. "You can't keep running from me. We belong together." Ava gritted her teeth. "The police are coming, you psycho. Get lost." Cashin's voice remained eerily calm. "You don't understand, do you? I did all of this for her. For us." Sophie felt sick. He sounded delusional, completely detached from reality. The minutes stretched endlessly. The only sound was the wind and Cashin's slow, deliberate breathing just beyond the door. Then sirens. Ava let out a shaky breath. Thank God. Cashin went silent. Sophie imagined him standing there, realizing his time was up. The sound of the approaching vehicles grew louder, and then, footsteps running. Sophie jumped up, pressing her ear to the door. He's leaving. Ava didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door just as the police cars screeched to a halt outside. Flashlights flooded the woods, voices shouting commands. But Cashin was gone. The officers moved quickly, securing the area, checking the perimeter. Harris arrived minutes later, her expression tense as she approached Sophie. Are you both okay? Sophie exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. He was here. He knew where we were. He cut the power. Harris nodded grimly. We'll track him down. We have enough evidence now to charge him. He won't get far. But as the officers spread out, searching the dark forest beyond the cabin, Sophie couldn't help but feel a sinking dread. Cashin had slipped through their fingers again, and something told her he wasn't done yet. The air inside the cabin remained heavy with unease, even after the police had searched the perimeter. Sophie sat on the couch, her hands gripping a mug of tea Ava had forced into her hands, though she barely registered the warmth. Her entire body felt cold. Detective Harris stood nearby, her radio crackling with updates. He's on foot. We're coordinating with other units to track him down. We'll find him. Sophie wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at her insides. Cashin had managed to disappear into the woods like a ghost. No matter how many officers were out there, would they really be able to catch him before he made another move? Ava sighed, running a hand through her hair. So what now? Do we just sit here and wait for him to try again? Harris frowned. Not exactly. We're going to relocate Sophie to a safer place until he's caught. He can't keep slipping through the cracks forever. Sophie blinked. Relocate. It's temporary, Harris assured her. Just until we're sure he's in custody. We can't risk him getting another opportunity. Ava exhaled in relief. Good. She can't keep living like this. Sophie bit her lip. Where would I go? There's a safe house in the city, Harris explained. It's monitored and secure. No one will know where you are, not even Ava. Ava stiffened beside her. What? But it's for your safety, Harris said gently. Cashin is too persistent. If he knows how close you and Ava are, he might try to use that against you. We can't take any chances. Sophie hesitated. The idea of going into hiding, completely cut off from the people she trusted, terrified her. But what choice did she have? Okay, she said finally. When do we leave? Right now, Harris answered. We don't want to give him time to regroup. Ava's jaw clenched, but she nodded. I don't like this, but if it keeps her safe. Sophie squeezed her friend's hand. I'll be okay. But as she packed her things, dread settled in her stomach. Because she knew Cashin wasn't finished. And she wasn't sure hiding would be enough to stop him. Sophie sat in the back seat of the unmarked police car, staring out the window as the dense forest gradually gave way to the outskirts of the city. The safe house was a small, nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, chosen specifically because it wouldn't draw attention. The officers assured her it was secure, but Sophie's anxiety refused to settle. Detective Harris drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Sophie through the rearview mirror. "You're doing the right thing," she said eventually. "Going off the radar will give us the best chance to catch him." Sophie nodded but didn't respond. Her mind kept replaying the last time she had seen Cashin, his voice calling to her from the darkness, his eerie calmness that sent a chill down her spine. When they arrived at the apartment, Harris led her inside, securing the locks before handing her a disposable phone. "No social media. No personal calls. If you need anything, you call me directly. Understand?" Sophie swallowed hard and nodded. "And Ava? She's safe," Harris assured her. "She wanted to come with you, but we can't risk Cashin using her as a way to track you." That stung, but Sophie understood. "How long do I have to stay here?" "Until we catch him," Harris said simply. "It could be a few days, maybe longer." Sophie exhaled, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had been running for so long, and now she was trapped in a different kind of prison, one built for her protection. The first night in the safe house was eerily quiet. The apartment had minimal furnishings, just the basics. A bed, a couch, a small kitchen. The police had set up surveillance outside, but knowing they were there didn't ease the sense of unease creeping up her spine. She barely slept. Every noise outside made her jump. Every shadow in the dimly lit room seemed to stretch into something sinister. Cashin was still out there, and even though she was hidden, she knew he wouldn't stop searching. The next day passed slowly. Sophie spent most of it staring at the walls, replaying every moment of the past few weeks in her head. The messages, the calls, the notes left at her door. Every moment where she had felt his presence but couldn't prove it. By evening, her disposable phone vibrated. She grabbed it immediately, heart pounding, but when she saw the caller ID, she exhaled in relief. It was Harris. "We have a lead," Harris said without preamble. "A surveillance camera near Ava's apartment caught footage of Cashin last night. He was circling the building, watching. He doesn't know you're here, but he's still looking." Sophie shivered. "Does that mean you can arrest him?" "Not yet," Harris admitted. "But we're closing in. We've alerted all units to be on high alert. He won't get far." Sophie nodded, gripping the phone tighter. "What if he finds me before you do?" Harris's voice was firm. "That won't happen. We're going to catch him, Sophie. I promise." But even as she hung up, Sophie couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. Because she knew Cashin, and she knew he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Sophie woke to the sound of silence. The safe house was eerily still, the only noise coming from the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. It was unsettling, this false sense of peace, knowing that somewhere out there, Cashin was still hunting her. She checked her phone. No new messages from Detective Harris. No updates. Just another long, suffocating day of waiting. Pacing the small apartment, she forced herself to stay busy, washing dishes, flipping through old magazines, anything to keep her mind from spiraling. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, the walls felt like they were closing in. Then, just as she was about to sit down, her phone buzzed. She lunged for it, heart racing. "Harris. We got him." Sophie's breath hitched. "You what? How?" "It wasn't easy," Harris admitted. "We had officers watching Ava's apartment. He came back again just like before, but this time we had enough to take him in. He resisted, but we got him." Sophie's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed onto the edge of the kitchen counter for support. He's in custody?" "Yes," Harris confirmed. "He won't be bothering you again." Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, relief. A weight lifted from her chest, and for the first time, she could breathe freely. "What happens now?" she asked cautiously. "We'll be charging him with multiple offenses," Harris explained. "Harassment, stalking, violating the restraining order. With the evidence we've gathered, he won't be walking free anytime soon." Sophie nodded, trying to process everything. "So it's over?" "It's over," Harris assured her. "You can go home." The drive back to the city was surreal. Sophie had spent so long looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next message, the next note, the next unwanted presence outside her door. And now it was gone. When she stepped into her apartment, everything looked the same, yet different. The space was still hers, but it no longer felt tainted by fear. She set down her bag and exhaled deeply, soaking in the quiet. Ava arrived minutes later, practically tackling Sophie in a hug. "You're back. Finally." Sophie laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "I missed you." Ava pulled back, grinning. So, how does it feel to be free? Sophie thought for a moment before answering. Like I can finally breathe again. Ava nodded, her expression softening. You're safe now. And no matter what, you're never going through anything like this alone again. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. Thank you, she whispered. That night, Sophie slept soundly for the first time in weeks. No nightmares. No anxiety clawing at her chest. Just peace. And in the morning, when she woke up to the sunlight streaming through her window, she knew that this time, the nightmare was truly over. Cashin was gone, and she had her life back.